Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Annesley Markdale. We hope you thoroughly enjoy tonight's performance, and to make your enjoyment complete, we strongly recommend you have a seat cushion from our friendly front-of-house staff.
Yep, sure.
There are 2 wheelchair-accessible washrooms on this level, adjacent to the main entrance, and there are additional facilities on the church's lower level. In the highly unlikely event of an emergency, there are exits in each corner of the sanctuary leading to sidewalk, garden, and Highway 10. But please use the highway side doors only in an emergency.
Yeah, this works fine.
Lastly, the usual friendly reminder and admonition about phones and other noisemakers. Thank you. We acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, and culture of the Anishinaabe, 6 Nations of the Grand River, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat Wyandot peoples, on whose traditional territories we gather and whose ancestors signed treaties with our ancestors. We also recognize the Métis and Inuit whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. May we all, as treaty people, live with respect on this land and live in peace and friendship with all its diverse peoples.
Good evening. It's a very small and intimate crowd today, and thank you very much for coming on a day that's rather inclement. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the June 19th edition of the Speakers of the Friends of Grey Highlands series, entitled Making Iron, Bloomery Iron Smelting in Canada, starting in the Viking Age. Once again, welcome and thank you for your support and your continued support. As he continues to support this speaker series, I'd like to put out another special thank you once again to Sean Ackerman of Highland Grounds Coffee. He consistently provides us tea and coffee for our speakers' events. Please visit his location on Highway 10, just north of Flesherton. Now to begin. When one lives in this part of Canada, which we call home, one often doesn't realize that we live in a country, a part of the country, a corner of the country that's amazing. It's a place filled with places of interest. Old Baldy, Lake Eugenia, the Blue Mountains, the Bruce Trail, Escarpment Caves, Chapman's, just to name a few. Among us are many not too commonly known places and people and places who are unique and special. Places like Vandeleur, Priceville, Ceylon, and Badgeros, which is not named after a Spanish settlers, the Badjeros. One of those little-known gems is found in the southeast corner of Grey Highlands in the former Osprey Township. It's the town called, it's not even a town, it's the hamlet called Wareham. Now, if one asks Grey Highlands residents or visitors where the hamlet of Wareham is located, I would guess that few would know. This tiny hamlet is so small that because it is a rural hamlet rather than a standalone municipality or distinct center subdivision, exact population of this isolated little town are not even tracked by Statistics Canada. Wareham is also the home of the Wareham Forge, and this evening's guest speaker, Darrell Markewitz. The Forge combines the facilities of a traditional coal-fired forge, modern welding and machine tools, and a fine metal studio equipped for casting and sheet forming. The shop has been in full operation since 1992, providing services for museums, retail shops, historic reenactors, and original artistic forgings for private commissions. Darrell has been working with forged steel and iron and producing historic reproductions since the late 1970s. As a high school student back in the early 70s, he was impressed by the artwork of a British designer and illustrator named Roger Dean. Roger Dean was an artist whose otherworldly-like paintings and depictions served as album covers on the covers of albums by groups such as Yes, Uriah Heep, and other heavy metal groups. And you remember those, that was post-psychedelic era, very sort of science fiction, robots and fairies dancing around, all kinds of things. Dean's work featured bright colors, a type of organic architecture design, plus repeated uses of ribbon-like reversed curve. To quote Darrell, "A lot of my earliest artwork was in the mediums of large acrylic paintings and silkscreen prints. Although I did attempt pieces in a wide range of materials and techniques, metalworking was not among these." And now, ironically, he says, "I had barely managed a passing grade in my grade 10 metal class." Darrell spent 4 years at the Ontario College of Art, located in Toronto, at Dundas and McCall. It's now called the Ontario College of Art and Design University. Of course, it seems to have moved up a step. I was just talking to Darrell before this little presentation and asked if he had been to the Beverly Tavern. The Beverly Tavern was a little tavern on Queen Street between McCall and Soho, right across the street from which is now City TV. I was a bartender at that tavern, and this was weekends. This is actually my, what do they call, dropout year, or the year before grade 13, after grade 13 and before university. And I got work at the bar as a tap man because my best friend's dad owned the place. But downstairs was where all the locals came. And you know, Queen and Spadina was not gentrified in those days, so the locals were kind of a rough group of usually men, very few women. But upstairs is where the Ontario College of Art students always came. And as they came in the door, this was usually Friday afternoon or Saturday, Friday after classes, they'd be coming through the door and you'd hear the grumblings among the regulars going, "Oh boy, looks like the spaceships have landed again." Because in those days, things which are vogue now, like Mohawk haircuts, colored hair, earrings in men's ears, and tattoos everywhere, were unique and not the norm. So they would say the spaceships have landed. Darrell spent 4 years there. He spent 5 years at Black Creek Pioneer Village, where he was the primary blacksmith for 3 of those 5 years. Now, an area of his personal interest and study has been the early medieval period, especially the Viking Age. This has resulted in work that truly spans the ages. Over the years, he has visited most of the major museums and living history sites in Canada, Eastern Canada, the Northeastern United States, and a number in England, Scotland, and Ireland. Since 1993, he has designed and produced the Norse Encampment series of programs, including living history presentations at the L'Anse aux Meadows National Historic Canadian Site in Newfoundland, and that was done for Parks Canada. The work included his involvement as a consultant for major exhibits, such as the Vikings North Atlantic Saga for the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C., and a full circle, first contact presentation and development for the Newfoundland Museum in St. John's. A related museum project was the creation of a 1,000 square foot exhibit called World of the Norse for the Cranbrook Institute of Science. Since 2001, a special area of research has been experimental archaeology and that of Bloomery Iron Smelting, of which he will talk this evening. To quote Darrell again, "I've developed a strong personal style, clearly visible through the body of past work. Like Art Nouveau, it is strongly influenced by historic artifacts of Europe and features aggressively forged by the elements, combined into flowing lines and often asymmetrical in overall design. I had forged a style. It was indeed a style, but it didn't have a name." Back in 2001, and this is to continue the quote, Peter Jackson's Fellowship of the Ring, the Hobbit series, was released. the films that made up this monumental Lord of the Rings would have a huge impact. When I saw the film the first time, I found I was in such familiar ground. They had based so much of their cultural landscape for Middle-earth on those same Norse, Saxon, and Celtic objects I knew so well. In the conceptual designs for the Elves of Rivendell, especially, I saw the same blend of Norse earnest style. Now, earnest style is a Viking Age art style which dated from approximately 1050 to 1125 AD. He saw it blended through Art Nouveau lines which were marked by my own long-developed style itself. I have since come to use the term Rivendell to describe my metalwork style. Tonight, although we focus on iron and types of iron and making iron, Darrell's expertise, as reflected in his curriculum vitae, his resume, almost a senior's moment, his resume has led him to over 100 experimental firings, workshops at the Forge, workshops at Brown University in the United States, Sir Sanford Fleming, St. Anthony in Newfoundland, and of course in Denmark and Europe. He has attended conferences and made presentations, academic papers, and project work in Canada, the United States, Europe, Ireland, and Scotland, and other places across the world. Darrell has 5 self-published smithing-related DVDs and CD-ROMs. He is the author of numerous publications related to areas such as Bloomery Iron Smelting, Smelting in Vinland, Basics of Bloomery Iron Smelting, Turf to Tools, Icelandic Sod-Walled Bloomery Furnaces, and one titled, and I love this title, Beginning Blacksmithing, or I Wish Someone Had Told Me That. Ladies and gentlemen, it's with great pleasure that we welcome artisan, blacksmith, curator, innovator, presenter, and local Grey Highlands gem, Darrell Markewitz.
Thanks, Phil. And a special welcome to all of you out there in the world who are watching this live streaming. Lesson here, be very careful about what you write on your website. It will come back to haunt you. I have a lot of material I'm going to try to cover here. It's going to be a little bit technical sometimes. I would encourage any of you to ask a question. If I say to you, I'll get to that, make sure that eventually your question is answered, okay? And I'm used to having a fairly casual kind of presentation thing, so away we go. Oh, yeah, don't push that button. Come on, you can do it. There we go. No. There. Okay. So you've just heard all sorts of wonderful things about me. The points that are probably most relevant to our presentation tonight is that I've been a professional artisan blacksmith since 92, really closer to about 85 if you include the time I worked at Black Creek Pioneer Village. I have become very much a specialist in the Viking Age, particularly the material culture of the Scandinavians. And we're looking at a period from about 800 to 1000 AD there. And I've done a lot of work in association with Parks Canada at the only authenticated Viking artifact site in North America, which is at Lancel Meadows, Newfoundland. If you know the rock, is that the right way around for you? If you get off at the ferry down here in Port aux Basques and you drive 12 hours until the road stops at the top end of the Northern Peninsula, that's where Lancel Meadows is. Because of work I did at Lancel Meadows, I originally got involved in a research project with them in 2001 year to try to replicate the iron smelt that was done by the Scandinavians, the first iron that was made in North America. And as it turned out, we didn't do the world's best job, but I got a bug at that point, and I was just sure I was going to make this work. And since then, I've done over 100 individual Bloomery Iron Smelting firings. So I'm going to have to give you some background technical language here, so we're on an even keel about what I'm going to be describing. And our 20th century world, although plastics are very important, is really the age of steel. The amount of new steel that is made in Canada, divided by the number of people living in Canada, works out to 328 kilos per person every year. Think about how much steel is in your car. Think about your washing machine. Think about every bridge you drive under. All of these objects are made of steel. Plastics, on the other hand, which are really dominating our discussion right now, is literally only half that volume every year. Where does iron come from? And now we're going to get into your high school chemistry, you all remember, right? Iron is a pure element, and the original composition of the Earth was primarily iron with some nickel mixed into it. And as the Earth started to cool, iron reacts quickly with oxygen. Everybody who's scratched the paint on their car knows this personally. And what you get is iron oxide, which is rust. Obviously, rust you can't do anything with. Almost all the iron on the Earth's surface is in fact oxidized. As soon as the Earth cooled enough that there could be liquid water, that iron oxidized. And all over the Earth's surface, there are thick layers of what they call banded iron, which is the oxide that was deposited literally 1 billion years ago on the Earth's surface. Most modern mines here in Canada are actually digging into these layers of ancient iron oxide. There are a couple of different forms of ore, and later on, you come by the table, I've got physical samples of all these things here. One source of raw iron oxide, hematite and magnetite, that's Fe3O4. This will be important later. And a good source for this material is Quebec, and I've got some Quebec material here. There's another important iron source that you found over the northern world. You won't find it here in Grey County. There is no iron ore in Grey County at all, unfortunately. Big problem for me. But if you get up into the Shield country, how many of those here have done any camping or backpacking up in Northern Ontario? A few of you? Well, you know when you're walking through the bush, you'll see a little stream, and it's got that oil slick effect on the surface, and you get kind of a powdery red material deposited there. That is primary bog iron ore. It has a bit of a complicated chemistry, and let's see if I actually get into it. Right. So there's a shot from actually northern Newfoundland, and you can see that oil slick effect, and the material you get deposited in a stream. Well, you need a rock underneath that has iron in it. So basalt in Europe, and here in North America, it's granite, and then you need a stagnant peat bog on top of that. When the plants in the bog die, they fall into the water and they make tannic acid. The tannic acid leaches the elemental iron out of the rocks. Now you've got atoms of iron in the water, you can't get at it. What you have to do is take that water and somehow bubble it. If it's a big pond, the waves will do it splashing over, or you get a stream that comes out of the bog and it runs over the rocks and it tumbles, and the oxygen in the air mixes with the iron in the water and makes iron oxide. Now comes the weird thing. There's a bacteria. The bacteria is anaerobic. It grows away from oxygen. So it lives between the vegetation layer and the top of the ground and the sterile subsoil where the gravel is. and it takes the water into its body, the little bits of iron oxide it thinks is a poison, so it puts it in vacuoles, little pockets in its body. They like to live in colonies. When they die, they leave the little grains behind. Imagine like flour. But it collects up, and if you collect up enough of it, you get a blob. That blob is a very, very pure form of iron oxide, and it was used historically all through Europe. This phenomenon occurs over the whole top side of the planet. Where could you get actually metallic iron on the Earth's surface? The answer is kind of no. So there are two possibilities. One is the core of the Earth itself is still a huge molten ball of nickel iron. So if you get a particularly deep volcano, the material that comes up from under the Earth is in fact nickel iron. One example of this is Disco Island between Baffin and Greenland, which is essentially a huge block of iron. And the other way you can find metal, pure metal iron on the Earth's surface is the weird one, because it's extraterrestrial iron. The planet that used to be between Mars and Jupiter that broke up and made asteroids, some of those pieces, when they hit the Earth, are in fact nickel iron. And somebody asked earlier about how you can tell it's meteor iron. It has 7 to 15% nickel content. Human beings couldn't do that until the late 1800s. So as soon as you find a really, really heavy rock, and there's a couple of pieces of meteorite on the table, come on, take a look after, you know you've got something weird. All the objects made of iron that humans possessed before about 1500, before the Christian era, are in fact pieces of nickel iron meteors. The most famous object is the dagger that was in King Tut's tomb, which is in fact a meteor that they've managed to trace to northern Egypt. The oldest worked piece of iron we know about is 3200 BC. So in terms of metals, it's a very, very unusual one. It's a new one in our repertoire of technology. Curiously enough, the only iron that was worked in North America is by the native groups living in the high Arctic, where there's no fire. Because in the wintertime, meteor hits the ice, in the spring, the ice melts, and there's a rock in the middle of the snow. What's that about? And they would take those meteors, which are quite brittle, and they would break them up between two stones and take the little sharp chips that are left over and then inlay them in a piece of bone or antler for spear tips or harpoon tips. So they're not actually making the iron, but they are utilizing it. So how do you actually make this? Our problem is that all we've got on the Earth's surface are either these rusty red colored rocks, again there's some samples on the table, or we've got this clay-like red substance, the bog ore. What we have to do technically is make a fireproof container. The simple thing to do is just take some clay and make a cylinder out of clay. You can use rock, but it's got to be something that will withstand quite high temperatures. And then what you're going to do is you're going to fill that with charcoal. Charcoal burns hot and clean, particularly if you give it some air blast. The more air you give it, the higher the temperature is going to be inside of your furnace. And we're looking at creating temperatures in the range of about 1400 degrees Celsius here. And then what we do is we throw the ore on the top. We're setting fire to it and we're burning things so the charcoal goes away. So we throw some more charcoal in, some more ore, and some more charcoal, and some more ore. And we do that for, 4 or 5 hours. What happens chemically in the furnace, well, now we go back to your high school chemistry, is the burning at high temperature creates carbon monoxide gas. Carbon monoxide is not very stable. So what happens is the carbon monoxide wants to be carbon dioxide, and it grabs the oxygen off the iron oxide ore we put in. And the carbon dioxide blows at the top, And the little particles of iron then are left inside the furnace. They're reduced. Now, the little particles of iron are heavy. Think about at home when you've got that molasses brown sugar and it all sticks together in the bottom of the bowl. That's exactly what happens. It's almost identical in terms of small particles sintering together, sticking together to make a mass. Now, the other thing that happens in the furnace is the ore has got other garbage mixed in with it. And it's so hot in the furnace, we're melting the walls. So the ash from the charcoal, the silica from the dirt and the walls sticks together and makes a real primitive kind of glass. The furnace is so hot that that glass is liquid. Also a glass, it's heavy. It falls to the bottom of the furnace. The bottom of the furnace is cold and it freezes. But the top of that liquid stays fluid because it's still hot. The iron particles are heavier than the glass. So they fall to the bottom through the liquid and they hit the solid bottom of that bowl. And they all stick together. If you do everything just right, hold your nose correctly, and you built your furnace properly, and you've danced around the sacrifice of the right God, at the end, you can pull out a spongy mass of iron called a bloom. This is where the language comes from. The furnace we use is called a bloomery furnace because of the process we're using. All right? And the bloom that's here on the table is one we made for my 70th birthday, or sorry, my 65th birthday. We did 65 kilos of all the ores we'd ever worked with, and that's a 17.5 kilo bloom. You can see it's about the size of a soccer ball. It's almost impossible to work with human tools, manpower tools, because of the raw size of it. We don't normally make our blooms that large. So, important to this discussion about metals are some modern types of metals and how they compare to this ancient stuff. You will all be aware of alloy steels. The most common example that everybody has at home is adding a small percentage, about 1-2% nickel, gives you stain-resistant steel, stainless steel, which is what all your cookware is made out of. That's completely modern, however. The main thing that alters the quality of raw iron are adding very, very small amounts of carbon. Those of you who are serious cooks may have carbon steel knives at home. Those are the real serious sharp ones you bring out, but they rust like crazy, particularly if you cut an onion or a green pepper. So you have to clean them off right away. Small amounts of carbon in the mix can radically change the quality of that iron. And we're talking about percentages in the range of part of 1%. At 1% carbon content, you have the material that you would use to make a file out of. At 0.5% carbon, we have a spring steel. And back in the day, for those of us who can remember this, you know, GM pickup truck springs were made of straight 1045, as they used to call it, 0.5% carbon steel, and you just made them big, and they lasted forever. The temperature in your furnace will determine what you get as their final product. Now, if you put too much carbon in, and what we're talking about here is something in the name of 2 to 5% carbon, hardly any, you change the melting point of the metal. Now what you can do is you can liquefy it before it physically reoxidizes. With this material, you can pour it off and put it into molds and make fry pans or stoves. The problem is you can't forge it. You can't heat it up and hammer it. It's brittle. How many of you have broken a fry pan by dropping it and having it hit a rock? That's what the problem is with that. It's really easy to make fry pans, but you can't do anything else but make a liquid shape out of it. They talk about pig iron. That's because during the medieval period, the way they used to utilize this cast iron out of the furnace is they would cut a trough from the furnace in the sand of the floor and have little lumps come off the side, which looks like a bunch of piglets nursing at a sow. And that's where that name comes from. So it's really just cast iron, but it's a shape of cast iron. And this is going to come up again. Cast iron isn't utilized in Europe until really the later part of the 1500s. It's a post-medieval object. So how does that connect to our modern world? In around 1855, I'm going to go backwards in time here. Around 1855, they developed a new kind of furnace, what's called the Bessemer blast furnace. And the Americans and the British argue about who really invented this. There's two different patents. They're both from about 1855, 1856. And essentially what you do is you take that big pool of cast iron and you blow air through it. And what blowing air through it does is it eats up the carbon and reduces the carbon content. So now you can take your cast iron and turn it back into this new material, steel, the same steel that our world is made out of. Steel is a great thing because you can machine it. And surprise, surprise, we're looking at 1850s here. The technology in the early days, it's contemporary for settlement here, right? Where machines start to become more important than things that are hand hammered out. So the metal that was made before 1855 is wrought iron. It may be a bloomery material, and it has to be hammered on to convert it into bars. And again, I would invite you to come up afterwards and take a look at the samples. When you've got a bloom under your furnace, it's got holes in it, and it's got slag mixed in with it. You can't make anything out of it the way it is. What you have to do is you have to take that lump and squeeze it to get all the holes out. And then it gets long and skinny, so what you have to do is fold it up again and hammer on it. It's wrought, okay, to create a solid metal bar. Now, wrought iron has no carbon in it, so it's real easy for the blacksmiths to make things out of. Because it doesn't have any carbon in it, it doesn't rust as fast as our modern metals do, which is why we've got things like the gates up on the Parliament Hill, right, which at this point are pushing 200 years old and not painted. Right? Try that with your car. Okay. It also has a very, very distinctive linear texture. One of the ways you can tell for this is you nick it 3/4 of the way and break it, and you can see you get that tendril effect. That's from the layers of squeezing it together and welding it up. And there's a little piece, again, on the bench you can take a look at easier. This is all the metal that would have been used in pioneer time, settlement era, as when this area was first developed, would have been wrought iron. Wrought iron is not a process, it's not a look. I don't sell wrought iron gates unless somebody really, really has a lot of money. I've got about 450 pounds of this stuff squirreled away. It's all from about 1860. They haven't made wrought iron, real wrought iron metal, anywhere on the Earth's surface after about 1970. So we were talking about I guess I already did this. We were talking about the bloomery, right? It's the name of the thing we take out of the furnace. It's the name of the furnace itself. Okay, so we're taking our ore, we're converting it into wrought iron metal. This can be considered to be an ancient, 1500 BC, up to what you could call beginning of the industrial age, 1800s. How you might build your furnace is dependent on what ore you use and what ethnic tradition you're working in. A furnace from Japan looks nothing like a furnace from Norway. They're working with different ores. Their whole concept of how to use this technology is different. So there's no one standard way to do this. It varies depending where you are in cultures. So another thing I'm going to throw in here that's going to be kind of important, it has to do with this whole idea about air and temperature. If you put in lots of air, your furnace gets really, really hot. If your furnace is really, really hot, it absorbs too much carbon and you get cast iron. Well, if you're trying to make something you can hammer on, it's failed. And I've got some cast iron we made there by accident on the table. During the later part of the Middle Ages, they figured out they could make cast iron and then put it in another kind of forge, a special kind of forge that was really, really hot, and burn off the surface, the carbon on the surface of that cast iron, and then take those thin plates and weld them together and make bars. The furnace they use for that is called a finery, all right? And it's going to come up when we look more into history. So, what's happening here in Canada in terms of our development of iron as a material for use in our culture? DeFasco and Stelco in Hamilton start 1910, 1911. And they grew into the huge giants that they were at one point here in Canada. Hamilton starts having metalworking industry in about 1835. But what they have there are foundries for casting cast iron. So a foundry is not a place where they make iron, but they take those iron pigs and melt them down and then pour them out into sand to make fry pans and stoves and all the rest of that stuff. Hamilton was chosen for its transport, not for its raw materials. Because in fact, none of the materials they needed for those industries are available in that part of Ontario. The furnaces in Hamilton were fired by coal, which, surprise, surprise, there isn't any, at least in southern Ontario. I don't think there's any in Ontario at all. So that had to be brought in from outside, as there's no iron ore around here either. So the iron had to come in from outside. Again, going backwards in time, those of us familiar with the history of Owen Sound, 1863, Kennedy and Sons set up as a foundry. So again, they're casting parts, primarily marine parts for ships. There was a big shipbuilding industry in Owen Sound back in that time period. Owen Sound was chosen for its availability for lake transport, because again, there's no coal and there's no iron ore. Kennedy and Sons closed in 86. In terms of actually making iron, the next kind of historic going backwards in time would have been the area around Marmora, Ontario, where originally there had been some bog iron ore in the bottom end of the Shield country. The problem with bog iron ore, there's never much of it in one spot. Because of the process of the leaching and the bacteria, it's a renewable resource. So if you harvest all the bog ore, you come back 25, 30 years, there's more there. That's okay if you got a village. It's not so good if you're trying to run an industry. So there's actually rock-type ores in that area as well. They were industry set up there about 1822, and it went through to about 1878 when they used up all the material available, all the ore materials. And it was chosen primarily because there was ore available there and really, really good water power. You have to remember that anything before about 1820 is absolutely powered by water. Steam doesn't come in, the War of 1812. They're using a type of ore called magnetite. It's called magnetite because it's magnetic. And there's a sample here on the table of that as well. The next industry that was set up in Ontario, going backwards in history, 1816, was a place called Normandale, the north shore of Lake Superior. And it was chosen as a site not because of the water power, but because it had available bog iron ore naturally down in that area of the country. Really, really great idea. They're using charcoal for their fuel still here. But the problem is the farmers came and they cut down the trees and they drained all the swamps so they could farm them. When they did that, there was no more bog ore being made. So they used up all the available ore there, and the industry collapsed. So it was a real going concern in the early 1800s there, but it was gone by the middle of the century. That's a big piece of slag, by the way. That's a big piece of that waste product. The first commercial iron processing in terms of making bars in Ontario is a place that's now called Lyndhurst. It used to be called Furnace Falls. And this is a bit of an interesting story. They had a contract to provide iron bars for the British Navy out of Kingston. The guy who set up that plant, and there was a blast furnace on one side of the river and a bloomery furnace on the opposite side of the river, was an American, and suspiciously, right around 1811, which the date should spark your interest, both furnaces on both sides of the river the same night burned to the ground. Okay. Again, that site was chosen because the water power was available and there was a local bog ore. And I've got a little piece of blast iron slag from that furnace on the table. Kelly and I did some help with some archaeology there a couple of years ago. The first really large commercial operation in Canada is a place outside Trois-Rivières called Fort Ste. Marie. And it was operated as early as the middle part of the 1600s in Quebec. And again, there's a natural kind of bog ore source in that area, available water power, and they were running a bloomery furnace and a blast furnace. Eventually, the new technology, the finery was brought in. They shut down the bloomery. They were making all cast and decarbonizing it to make bar. So this would have been the source of local ore for military equipment during, for example, the French-Indian War, right, in the middle part of the 1700s. And then the next thing in history, or the earliest thing that happens in history, is at Meadows, Newfoundland, by the Norse, sometime around the year 1000. Between that and probably about 1025, just been redated. They made a small furnace, they fired it once, and they did a real horrible job. So there had been, I just finished writing a paper about this, actually, reanalyzing this site. And my opinion is this was an attempt to test a material that was available to them. Greenland was a colony after the late 900s, but there's no trees in Greenland. Because there's no trees, even though you've got ore, you can't make iron there. And over the 400-year life of the Greenland colony by the Scandinavians, the main thing they brought in from outside was iron bars. So they never really settled in northern Newfoundland. The Norse never came here to stay intentionally. And this is probably just a test to see if they could do it. And that's what got me started in this. Like I said, I had been invited by Dr. Brigitte Wallace of Parks Canada to work with her and a fellow from Norway called Arne Espeland, who's a historic metallurgist, and assisted by Mark Pilgrim, who was one of the staff interpreters there that I trained. And we tried to make iron. And the furnace we built, a little bit bigger than the lectern here, lectern, so, you know, the length of your forearm in 4 directions, and, maybe about 30 centimeters tall, and we threw all the ore in a big blob on the top, and we set it on fire, and we thought we'd get something, and what we got was nothing. All right, because surprise, surprise, not one part of that chain would ever have been successful. But at the time, although archaeologists have been studying this in Northern Europe, I shouldn't say no one, very few people had actually physically ever tried to do it. The doer and the thinker, and this is going to come up again. We were firing with charcoal, we were using local bog ore right off the same ground that the Scandinavians had gathered theirs, and the air was provided out of a small twin-chambered alternating pump bellows, which is again going to come up. Moving into 2003, I had the opportunity to meet two guys from down in the States, Skip Williams and Lee Sauter. And Lee is the grand old man of successful iron smelting here in North America. And they had originally been interested in African technologies, and they had developed something that worked. Didn't look anything like the archaeology, but they could get it to work. And Lee was blessed by having a type of limonite, quite pure ore. Remember I was talking about that ancient stuff that got laid down a billion years ago? Put mud on that, a lot of mud, and compress it. And then wait a million years and let it, the seed drain away, and then the land lift up, and you get the Blue Ridge Mountains. Okay, now imagine a peanut butter sandwich. Okay, the bread is limestone, it's the compressed mud. The peanut butter is a layer about 20 or 30 feet thick, runs under the entire Blue Ridge from bottom to one end to the other. So in colonial times, what they would do is they would go to the edges of the mountain and find the layer and dig into it. Typically, they would take some people they didn't like a whole lot, and they would get them to dig in there until it collapsed on them. Then they'd move over 150 feet, get another bunch of people they didn't care about too much, get them to do it again. So the fact that we had learned a system that would work, I started then taking what Lee and Skip had taught me and trying to apply that to a more historical model, a Viking Age model. And what we developed is what now has been come to call the short shaft furnace. And that image you can see there would have been 2003. And you can see the furnace is about the diameter inside of a 5-gallon pail, plastic pail, and about 2 of them stacked on top. Okay, and it took us a while, but we eventually figured out how to do this quite effectively. That smelt, by the way, we got nothing. Lots of slag, but nothing else. Part of the problem was I found that there was a real isolation between the academics and the practical workers, and they didn't talk to each other at all. And so much that was available in the academic literature was plain wrong. That method that you see described there will not work. It also doesn't properly illustrate what the inside of the furnace looks like. Our problem is in the archaeology, and I was talking to some people at the start. Our clay furnace, it's clay. Hit it with a couple of thunderstorms and it's gone. What you get, and the iron, we take the iron away because it's valuable. We were hard to get it. What we find is a ring of slag with maybe a bowl shape in the middle of it. And after 1,000 years, that's all we find. How tall was that? Where does the air go in? How fast do you add the stuff on the top? How big are the pieces you put in the top? All those questions were not answered. So what happened is one of the other crazies here in North America, and this would have been 2004 to 2005, started an association of people that were crazy enough to be interested in this called the Early Iron Symposiums. This is Michael McCarthy out of the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown, New York. And the first year he gathered about 90 people from across mainly the United States. And we tried it. And we had spotty results. We didn't get our first actual iron bloom until smelt number 6. And if I haven't mentioned this to you folks, because I was telling Tim upstairs, every time we do an iron smelt, it costs about $350. So we had done this 6 times at that and hadn't gotten anything. So Lee gathered together some senior members of people who were serious about this research, and he would invite us down for 10 to 14 days at his place down in Lexington, Virginia, and we would make iron for a week. And we'd typically break into 2 teams. One team would build, the second team would fire, and then we'd alternate. And we would change one thing. What's the angle? What's the position? What's the size? what is the particle size. So we were able to put together a whole series of ideal working conditions to get this to go. In that period, I developed what I call the Okano-Norse furnace. It's basically a pile of fire brick with a piece of sheet metal around the outside of it, and you put sand between the bricks and the sheet metal to stabilize it, and you can build one of these in probably about 15 minutes, and it's a bunch of fire brick. It's not expensive. And then when you go to get your bloom out, what you do is you just take the sheet metal off the outside and just pull the bricks off and expose the bloom. Makes it really, really easy to do. As we established, you can see what I'm doing as I'm going through the chronology of how I developed this over the last 20 years. 2005, we basically got a basic method, and quite arrogantly, I approached the people who were running the Canadian National Blacksmiths Conference that year out in Nova Scotia, and I said, "We can demo Viking Age iron smelting at your conference." Yeah, which in fact we did. We didn't necessarily have the best results, but it was the first time that our work then had been presented to the general public. So here's some of the variables about how to actually get this to work in your backyard. There's a relationship between the size of the type of ore you have, how big the pieces are, and how big the charcoal is. The process we were talking about of carbon monoxide to dioxide to reduce is a gas chemistry. It doesn't work in a solid. So you need to have either real small pieces of ore or ore that's porous. When you get a chance to look at the natural bog ore, you see it weighs almost nothing because it's all full of holes. But if you're working with a rock ore, you've got to get the size right. Charcoal, if your charcoal's too big, the spaces between the pieces of charcoal are too large, and your ore falls too fast, it doesn't get a chance to react. If your pieces are too small, what happens is it clogs up the airflow through your furnace, and the fire isn't hot enough. So there's an ideal size, which happens to be, surprise, surprise, about the size of a golf ball. And nothing smaller than the tip of your little finger. So 5 millimeters to 25 millimeters. Surprise, surprise, if your ore doesn't have at least 50% elemental iron in it, you won't get anything out of one of these old style furnaces. Modern furnaces, anyone here ever seen a taconite pellet? It used to fall off all the railway cars coming down from Northern Ontario. So it looks like a red marble about a centimeter across, half an inch across. At the mine, they can take ores 35% iron, they crush it, they sort it, they mix it into balls with clay. That's what they put in the blast furnace down at Dofasco. That stuff is about 65% iron content. So you just can't use any old iron ore. You need ore that's got a certain percentage of iron in it for this to be successful with this old technology. We found that out by using bad ore and not getting anything, okay? It turns out the amount of air you deliver to the furnace has got a sweet spot, and this is worth money in the bank, kids. 1.2 to 1.5 liters per minute for every square centimeter of cross-sectional area at career level. And you can thank Lee Sauter for that, because he's the one that wrote the paper that announced that. And we normally process about 20 kilograms of ore. We use about 50 kilos of charcoal. And we hope to make a bloom in the 3 to 5 kilo range. We don't make them bigger than that, because if you can make one this big, you can make one as big as what's on the table. It just takes more time. If we get a small one, it proves that our system is working. And that's small enough I can forge it up afterwards. I'm Tim. Oh, I'm not paying attention to the time here, sir, so you can yell at me when I'm going too long. Starting in 2007, we started concentrating on specific archaeological problems. And the first one we tackled, due to the influence of a friend and mentor, Kevin Smith, from Brown University, was based on an archaeological dig he did in Iceland at a place called Halls. And this was an industrial level iron processing site from the late Viking Age. A family grouping there made iron over and over and over again for about 2 generations as a way to make money for their family. The problem in Iceland is there's no clay. How do you make something that's fireproof? What they would do is they would cut turfs, kind of sod, but not really the same as sod, different language in Iceland, and you would pile those up in a cone, cut a hole in the center, and use that for the body of your furnace. And we would do a total of 11 experimental smelts in this series, extending. The last one was done in 2024. If someone in the Canadian government wants me to give me a grant to send me to Iceland, because that would be the next step in the experiment, I can't afford it. And there have been formal papers published on this process of experimentation, and there's a report over there. It was one of the books I wrote last year. Whoop. So there's no iron ore in this part of Canada, or in Ontario. And yeah, you could drive up to Minden or Gravenhurst and you probably can find it. Kelly and I went up to Old Woman Bay north of Sudbury. And yeah, on the nature walk, we found a spot I could have probably gathered enough for a smell. Provincial Park, I can't do it. But finding it in the bush is a little bit tricky. You got to get just the right spot. So what we did is we made up an artificial bog ore. And what we call, it's dark dirt. Dark is my medieval group that I work with. And it's made of Fe2O3 red iron oxide powder that's used to make paints or to mix with concrete to make red colored flooring. And you can buy that in big sacks. It's used for pottery too, for glazes. 2008, again that same year, something else that happened is I got invited, the only Canadian that went to an iron smelting symposium in Helsingborg, Denmark. There were people there from the Scandinavian countries, from Belgium, and from the UK. I made a lot of good friends there. And again, we smelted every day for a week. Canadian taxpayer, I got a Canada Council grant to fly over there for this. Thank you very much. Starting in 2009, a lot of these series were overlapping each other. Starting in 2009, we got really, really serious about trying to learn the technologies and the inclinations of what was happening in Vinland at Lanza Meadows 1,000 years ago. That particular series would total 9 smelts. The last one we did was in 2022. It would include 2 experimental firings on the site at Lanza Meadows, about 200 meters from where it had been done 1,000 years ago. And that previous shot was the archaeological drawing of what they recovered. That's the photograph of what we did after the next day. They're virtually identical, which means we've got to be close. We got the same remains. 2014, I got approached about doing a project in Scotland at the Scottish Sculpture Workshop. It was based on Pictish, after the Romans, but before the Viking Age in Scotland, eastern Scotland, based on 2 archaeological sites, a place called Riney in Aberdeenshire, where they had this rather mythic carved stone that's about human size, the original, with this axe over his shoulder. And their intent was to take natural material from Riney, smelt it using the 1,500-year-old technology, and make a replica of that axe. And we got real lucky because there was an archaeological site, Kudethel, up near Inverness, like 100 miles away, which is as close as you ever get when you're trying to do archaeology. We did a total of 9 iron smelts related to that project. We made a number of replica Anglo-Saxon and Pictish axes. We used a number of local ores to see whether or not any of them were good. Turns out no. And then the end product of this is I made a replica of the Rineyman axe out of iron that we made in the process using the old technology, and then we threw it into a peat bog. Now, it is actually stamped with the 2023 date, so it won't confuse an archaeologist in 500 years. And that's Eden Jolly, who's the fellow that I work with on that project. And I let Eden, who had a better arm than me, do the tossing up in the Isle of Skye. The project we're involved in now, the series we're involved in right now, is exploring the problem of Norse air supply. Remember I said that the more air you put, the hotter the furnace gets. But there's a limit how much air you can put in when a person is pumping the bellows. And one of our problems with the Viking Age is we have count them, two illustrations of Viking Age bellows. They're both blacksmiths. And it turns out that piece of equipment, which I've recreated based on this illustration, is too small to make enough air. It won't fire a furnace. So we would actually do a total of 15 smelts using Viking Age style equipment. We built a giant bellows that makes enough air, but a human being can hardly power it. And the last time we used that, it was about 38 degrees Celsius out, and the boys would not they've stopped me. They wouldn't let me pump anymore, because it's actually brutal. This is the mid-size unit. That blacksmithing bellows makes 120 liters per minute, 1 second a pump. This puts out about 500. And that piece of equipment will successfully make iron using Viking Age furnaces. Does it look like what we have from history? Leather and wood, right? After 1,000 years, we do not have one physical sample of the tools. We don't know. That's all guesswork. And eventually, you know, even that piece of equipment, I like to have 3 people, better 4, that do nothing but run the bellows all day, 8 hours, 1 stroke per second. We worked out this cute little mechanical thing that has a sliding gate that moves back and forth. And by changing the motor speed, we can change how fast it pumps. And we hooked that up to an electric blower. Not quite the same, but it's close. So, what does this all add up to after 25 years? I've done 101 Bloomery Iron Smelts. We've utilized 2,560 kilograms of ore, 34 different ore or variations on types of ore over all those tests. We've consumed 620 kilograms of charcoal, which is a lot of bloody charcoal. That's why there's no trees left in places like Scotland, by the way. They cut them all down for the iron smelting industry. We've smelted altogether 590 hours in total. We've made 85 blooms, which isn't bad for 101 smelts, which total almost 500 kilos of blooms. Our average yield, our return, which is kind of important when you think about it, is just over 20%. So we're using all these raw materials. We're not getting much back. That's how it was in the Viking Age. Okay, so one more thing I want to say related to that. Remember I was saying at the beginning that your metal load is almost 400 kilos per year of modern steel? On the table is what they call a currency bar. And it's a little bit bigger than your thumb. It's more or less the length of your forearm. That was the standard way bars were made by the iron smelter to sell to the blacksmith during the Viking Age. It weighs about 2 kilos. That's your iron for your life. That's enough to give you an axe and a knife and your share of the cooking pot. And that's it. Think of how that compares to how much material we have in our modern world and how much stuff we're throwing away. So, because I did all this stuff and I'm an arrogant bastard, I've been trying to publish it. As a non-academic, I don't have really good access to the academic publishing system. They really don't like people without a degree submitting stuff. So I started a website. And as you well know, The iron smelting material alone has got about 1,000 images in it. And there's documentation for every one of the iron smelts. The blog at this point is about 1,200 individual postings. But anybody can do a website, who knows if it's true, right? I have, in fact, been presenting at conferences. So up to date, I've done 13 academic conference presentations. I've got 9 either book chapters or formally published articles, mainly in a journal called XArch. It's a journal of experimental archaeology out of Europe. Yeah, I'm getting a little beat up for this stuff, and starting at the end of 2004, I started doing some writing, and to date, I've done 4 published reports and 3 books, which, thank you very much for coming to the book launch, because this is really kind of the book launch for 20 years before the blast. People get the joke or not? Which is documenting all the work I've done in all these years. And I want to put in a commercial note here at the end. I'm in the process of organizing what will be the first Canadian National Bloomery Iron Symposium. It's going to happen at a place called Sanctuary Armory, which is just outside of Peterborough, Ontario, over the Labor Day weekend. Yeah, you've got to pay to go there. It's $350, with the tax in, to be there. Everybody's going to be grouped into a team. They're going to build a furnace and fire it and go home with a bloom. So thank you very much. Oh, not bad. Not bad. An hour and a bit. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. I don't know what the best format would please you, whether you would rather just have people fire out, or whether you just want to gather around the table with a coffee in your hands, whatever people want to do. Does anybody actually have any questions? Well, there you go.
I think what we can do, first of all, Darrell, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Darrell a big round of applause, first of all.
Thanks,
It was an extremely amazing history, first of all, of iron and iron ore, and all the different types of iron, which I don't think many of us knew it existed. I was stuck on the fact that I've heard pig iron all my life and never knew what the hell pig iron was. Yeah. You also do, just if you can explain, you do the Bloomery iron, mm-hmm. and you've done archaeological research, mm-hmm. and you've produced reproductions of what people did centuries ago. What else do you do at your forge in Wareham?
It's a combination of things. We're all mature individuals, and I suspect a lot of us are retired. Yeah. When you're trying to make your life as an artisan, there's 2 ways you could succeed. One is the giant thumb. You could do one thing and do it extremely well and be the person for that thing. And here in Canada, in terms of Viking Age swords, there's a guy named Jake Pounding from New Brunswick, and his work is spectacular. I could never be as good as Jake. Jake doesn't make car gates, though. So I took the other approach as an artisan working here in Grey County, which is I had a lot of irons in the fire, as we used to say. And so I was running workshops. I was doing museum work, consulting, training, and making replicas. I was doing architectural projects. If anybody needs to have 3 stories of stairway in their house, let me know. And then small kind of artistic things. And I was selling at craft shows when I started.
And BC? The fish?
The fish in BC.
So you were doing the British Columbia sculptures, and you were saying you were doing skin diving at the age of 7 and things like that?
Oh, he's been reading up in the background there. Not in BC, but here in Ontario. Yeah, my dad, before my parents broke up, one of the last things he gave me was a snorkel and a set of fins. So yeah, I've been up to Tobermory any number of times.
No, but didn't you do a sculpture for out in BC somewhere?
No.
Big fish and stuff?
Oh,
the ocean?
Okay.
I forget the title right now.
Probably the thing you're thinking of was one of the pieces I did for Elora, Ontario. And I'm not sure if the room heard this. The town of Elora, about 15 years ago, they had $10,000 and they were going to buy a sculpture. And somebody in the community said, well, why don't we make 10 sculpture bases? And then what they do is they invite artists to submit and lend them a sculpture for the summer on one of the bases. And one of the pieces I did was a big ancient archaeological fish.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's one of the pieces that sold, actually. So now in Elora, they've got about 35 sculpture bases. The competition's every year for any artists here. And Town Paisley does it, and Halliburton does it. So they got a lot of bang for their buck in terms of interest into the community. And people come just to see the sculptures every year.
Excellent. What we're going to do, I think, rather than have questions now, is what you suggested, which is a great idea. After we finish today for the formal procedure, if you want to come up, look at some of the samples, and talk to Darrell himself. Darrell, don't go away, because we do something traditionally here, and it's almost time for tea and coffee and mingling, and to acquire books and to talk to you and ask questions. We also have door prizes, so please get your door prize tickets ready. Today we have 4 books, one of them donated by Darrell. And what we're going to do is have Darrell pull one of your tickets out. I will read the successful number.
Okay.
Then you can come up and choose a book. Now, Darrell's book.
I don't have a ticket in here, by the way, okay?
Darrell's book, the very first one, Darrell's book is Beginning Blacksmithing. And this is one of the ones you've had published already?
Yep.
So if you would please.
And this is all the things not to do. It doesn't teach you how to make things, but it tells you all the mistakes not to make.
Thank you. The last 4 numbers are 4464. 4464.
That's good, sure.
Would you like to come up and get it? There you go. If you want to pass it on.
Darrell has a nice piece of work out in front of the great museum down in Can you explain a little bit about his inspiration and when he's going to get his name on it so we can...
Well, that's one of the first pieces I did for Elora. So it was related to the history of Elora, which would also be somewhat the history of Flesherton as a mill community. So at the time the mills in Elora were active, they were using a source of water power, which is not a big wheel. It's a turbine mill. Basically, you take a barrel and you put a propeller inside of it. So that's the form of the sculpture. And the turbine assembly that sticks up out of the top is supposed to catch the wind and make the whole thing move. And then I deliberately chose to make the pieces inside polished stainless steel so they'd catch the light and reflect it. And then it's got some solar lights on it too, so that at night something's going on. And there's wind chimes in there too that sound in an attempt. Well, I thought there was going to be a little plaque on there, but.
Oh, so that's okay.
Yeah. So part of the problem is when you make these sculptures, I was telling Sharon Jackson, what do you do with them? So I've sold a couple out of Elora, but now, So I'm really, really pleased to donate that to the community and to have that at the museum. Yeah.
Thanks, Stuart. Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, give me the ticket.
Here's the ticket.
Here's your next one, if you'd like to draw,
Okay.
please. The number is 4461. 4461. Elaine. Elaine will pick the one she wants.
I'm trying to see if I can get you too.
Number 3 is 4460. Keeping the family.
this. Yeah, yeah. Okay. There's not a lot of people here, so they are going to be grouped.
Nobody else from your family here, right? No. Okay. 4463. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as always, we wish to sincerely acknowledge the support of the speaker series by the Municipality of Grey Highlands and the good folks here at Annesley United Church. Additional thanks are extended to our much valued community partner, Highland Grounds of Flesherton. Thanks to all the friends of the South Grey Museum and Barry and Jane for renewing and continuing the speaker series. And again, a special tip of our hat to our In the Direction and to our Mr. Technology himself, Tim Riley of Leaking Ambient School, Flesherton. Just a reminder that the speaker series will take a summer break and we will resume in September after that break. On September the 17th, then October 15th, and November 19th. The topics will be the greening of Sudbury, World War I All-Black Battalion, and the birds of Central America. Thank you very much once again for your presence today. Have a great time, and thank you very much to Darrell.